Good evening, everyone. My name is Wynn Trainer. I am the Director of Individual Giving at the New York Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's event, which is a conversation in celebration of best-selling author Fiona Davis's latest novel, The Lions of Fifth Avenue. This is an event we really couldn't pass up, since the book journeys deep into the heart of the library's iconic flagship location, the Stephen A. Schwarzman Building at Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street. The timing is also quite apropos, since earlier today, Good Morning America named The Lions of Fifth Avenue as its August book club pick. Congrats, Fiona. Fiona is also joined in conversation tonight by Zibby Owens, who is, among other things, herself an author and host of the fantastic literary podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, which I highly encourage you to check out. And with us in the audience tonight, we have members of our Young Lions group. The Young Lions program is a diverse, vibrant, and growing community of young professionals in their 20s and 30s who are helping further the mission of the library and creating a new generation of supporters for our work. If you, or perhaps a loved one, would be interested in the benefits of that program, please check out our website. And if you haven't already, you can purchase The Lions of Fifth Avenue through the library's shop. Just go to nypl.org, shop live. You can also find that link on YouTube. And of course, we'll drop it in the chat in Zoom for you as well. Now, before I invite Fiona and Zibby on, there are just a couple of quick housekeeping items I want to go over. First, this event is being recorded. Don't worry, not you, just the speakers and the event itself. Next, Fiona will take some of your questions at the end. You can send them at any time during the conversation by typing your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom app. We'll make sure they get over to Fiona and she'll answer as many as she can. And then finally, I hope everyone was safe during the storm today, but because of that, I know many of us have been dealing with some power outages. So if Fiona or Zibby gets disconnected at any point, don't panic, don't worry. They'll be back just as soon as we can get them on. So without further ado, please welcome Zibby Owens and Fiona Davis.
Hello.
Hi, Fiona.
We did it.
I'm so glad that I can be here to celebrate such a big night with you. This is such a thrill. I wish we were in person, but congratulations on your pub day and congratulations on being picked by GMA Book Club, which is amazing.
Thank you. And thank you. You've been such a champion of the books, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for everything you do to connect authors and readers. It's very much appreciated.
Oh, well, I get the thrill of getting to talk to you. And I feel like now you just have been taking me on a tour of all these New York landmarks. You know, last year we were together talking about the Chelsea Hotel for your book, The Chelsea Girls, and now the Lions of Fifth Avenue, which is so exciting. I'm sorry we can't be in the library to talk about this, but whatever, this is great too. Has its perks. Anyway, can you please tell everybody a little bit about what your latest book is about and what inspired you to write it? Why'd you pick the library?
Sure. So all my books are set in landmark New York City buildings. And this one, of course, is set at the New York Public Library. And there's two timelines. I love that dual timeline structure. And in 1913, it's from the point of view of a woman named Laura, who's the wife of the library superintendent, who lives in an apartment deep inside the library with her husband and two kids. And this is an apartment that actually existed. And she's surrounded by all this knowledge, but she feels stifled. She wants more out of life. And so she applies to Columbia Journalism School and gets in, and her world is really cracked wide open. And then the other timeline is 1993. And that's from the point of view of a library curator named Sadie, who's about to put up a really big rare book exhibit. And one of her books goes missing. And she's drawn into a series of book thefts that happened 80 years ago, as well as a terrible tragedy that happened to the superintendent's family back then. And I like to say it's about the magic of the written word and the power of women's voices.
Well, you should say that then. You should say it again and again. That's a great catchphrase. I have to say, until the last sentence of this book, I did not know how it was going to end, how everything tied together. Sometimes I feel like such a moron reading these books because I'm like, oh, I should have seen that. But then I guess it just speaks to the brilliance of the author. So anyway, until the last minute, I was like on the edge of my seat, so wondering how this was all going to link up. So great job.
Thank you. That is what every author likes to hear. So thank you very much.
Well, there you go. Moron readers like me. Happy to oblige. Why this landmark? Why did you pick the library?
Yeah, sure. So, I've done a lot of author talks around the country, and people are always offering up landmarks because, I've been at the Barbizon Hotel for Women, Grand Central Terminal, the Chelsea Hotel. And so people are always saying, here's my favorite landmark. You should set one there. And the New York Public Library came up over and over again as I was giving book talks around the country, to the point where I thought, okay, I need to start looking into this. And so when I was ready to start a new book, that was the first building I really looked into. And I did a deep dive and was transfixed.
And did you have any sort of personal relationship to the library prior to that? Had you ever done any work there? Like, was it a go-to spot? Do you remember the first time you went? Any juicy stories from the library?
No juicy stories, unfortunately. But what's funny is when I first came to New York, I came as an actress. And I was with a theater company, and we put on plays, and it meant we did everything. We did the lights, the costumes, and a friend and I would always get assigned to do the costumes. And so we'd go to what was called the picture library in the New York Public Library, in the main building there, because you could see pictures of costumes, what they look like, what clothes look like in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And this was before the internet. You couldn't just search from home. And so we'd make these amazing forays and find all these great images for costumes of all things.
Wow. So tell me about the research you did. I mean, is all the stuff in the book actually true? Do all these different ways to get around and all of that, I won't say anymore, no. But is all of that true? Like, does all of that exist? And how did you figure it all out? What kind of research did you do?
It's a great question. Well, I learned a lot about the library. And the one thing that really shocked me as I started researching was that there was this apartment deep inside the library for the superintendent and his family. And he lived there. His name was John Fiedler. In fact, I think we have a slide, number 5, to give a show of the location of it. So there he is. And he lived in this apartment. It's a 7-room apartment on the mezzanine level on the south side of the building. And what you do is you go up this small set of stairs, and then there's 2 courtyards in the New York Public Library, the north one and the south one. And it's kind of situated right on the one corner of the south courtyard. And the bedrooms went up to the top there, and then the living areas were along the bottom, and that's where they lived. And so he lived there with his wife and 3 kids. His daughter was born in the library. The kids apparently would they play baseball in the reading room using books as bases until they got caught and got in trouble. It was really something. And so as I learned about that, I thought, well, that's amazing, because if a family's living there, I can play with that. I can make up my own superintendent family, which is what I did, and just play with them and have them do whatever I want. And so that was really, really fun. And the most amazing thing about working in the library is that they have a room there for authors with book contracts. And so I was able to work on a book about the library in the library. And they would bring over books on the construction or typhoid or whatever it was I was looking at, Harper's Bazaar magazines from the 1910s. And I could go through and do all my research there. And I have to give a huge shout out to the librarians and the team at the library. They were so helpful, to the point that at one point in an early draft of the book, there was a dead body. And I emailed one of the librarians and I said, look, if you had to hide a body in the library, where would you put it? And she emailed me back right away, didn't miss a beat, down in the basement, here's where it should go. And it was so helpful. And she said, I've never gotten that question before. But she could answer it, and we're probably both under surveillance at this point. But hey.
She answered that too quickly. I mean, maybe, did you get her number? I don't know about this librarian. That's not something you want to have on the tip of your tongue, is it?
It was great. And that's what I love about librarians is they're asked so many different questions. And that was fun in the book to have a character who had worked as a reference librarian and answer questions like, when did the Statue of Liberty turn green? You know, and be able to find that. And so Sadie, who's the 1990s librarian, is just the best at figuring those answers out.
And what about the Berg collection? Tell me about that.
Yeah, oh, if we could show up, there's a photo, I think number 6 of the Berg collection. So that's where Sadie works in the library. And it's this amazing library within a library in a way. You can't just walk in, you have to show that you're a scholar or a researcher. And they have manuscripts, first editions, letters, diaries from over 400 authors like Walt Whitman, Tennyson, Nabokov. And they also have really interesting ephemera like Jack Kerouac's boots or a lock of Walt Whitman's hair, Charlotte Bronte's writing desk. And they even have Virginia Woolf's walking stick, which she left by the side of the river before she killed herself. And what these documents and things that they have are so important, because you have something like a draft of a Walt Whitman poem, and we can put up maybe slide number 7, with words crossed out, or they have Virginia Woolf's diaries that were written on stationer's notebook and pen. And you really get a sense of the thought process behind these authors. And it makes us realize, I think, that these authors who we revere are human, right? And they scratch things out and they got things wrong and they change things. And as a writer, you know what that's like. And, you know, there might be a rip or a tear where they were frustrated, or, you know, a coffee cup stain where they didn't realize this piece of paper might be worth tens of thousands of dollars one day. And so to me, the Berg collection is this just really gem of a location, and just full of fascinating objects about the history of literature, which is so important. And that's where this character Sadie works and kind of rules the roost.
I have to say, I've been involved with the New York Public Library for a long time myself. And one of the things I do now is co-chair the library lunch each year, and I'm on the advisory council. And we always have this meeting of the co-chairs and the steering committee, and they bring out documents just like you're talking about, and we get to wander around like in this little group and peer in at like Charles Dickens's notes on his serialized stuff, and like it's just amazing. It's just amazing that it still exists and it's there. And having seen it in real life and then reading when like something is gone, I could feel it, you know, the pain of how somebody who was so attached to that could feel and why it was such a big deal. So anyway, it's an amazing place to have that sort of repository of information and history. Really, it's amazing.
It is a reason to join the Young Lions then, I think.
I was a young lion. I am now way too old to be a young lion. I'm an old lion, but I was a young lion at one point, and I loved that group. So yeah, that was amazing. And always talking about different authors. Now here we are. It's like full circle. It's amazing. So back to the characters. You had one scene when Sadie is touring around a new trustee for the museum, and she says to him, hold on, something about how much she loves I just love the feel and smell of old books. Can't help myself, because he wants to start touching them. So do you share that? Do you love that, the sensoriness of all of that?
Absolutely. I mean, libraries were always so important to me. And there's something about walking into one and just the way it feels that just calms me down. When I was a kid, we moved around a lot, and the one constant was always the library. And so once a week, my mother would put us in the car and we'd go to the library, and my brother would go get books on trains, and I'd get books on Judy Blume and horses. And so that was always the one thing that remained constant. And I think because of that, I just have a great appreciation for libraries and librarians around the country and around the world.
And was there actually a book theft?
So in the book theft in my book is actually inspired by one that occurred at Columbia University's Butler Library in 1994, where it was $1.8 million of rare books and manuscripts was stolen over a period of 3 months, and no one could figure out how the thief was getting in and out. And I was lucky enough to speak with the librarian who was in charge at the time, a woman named Jean Ashton. And she talked about how they just couldn't figure it out. And the staff started looking at each other, wondering, all right, who, is it an inside job? What's going on? They did eventually find the thief there. And Jean Ashton went before the judge and asked for a harsher sentence. She explained that what he stole was not just X worth of pages worth X, but a piece of Western history and culture, and that it would cause just a dramatic loss to scholarly research if it was taken and disappeared. And she described libraries as being really safekeepers of the artifacts of the past, and that their value can fluctuate over time. So something that wasn't valuable 100 years ago, like women's diaries or records of slave transactions, today are very valuable because our way of thinking has changed and evolved over time. And she made this passionate plea before the judge. And he was so moved that he went ahead and granted a harsher sentence. And later in 2002, they created a kind of a protection act for cultural heritage resources. And it said that if you steal something from a museum or a library, you'll get a harsher sentence. And so to me, Jane Ashton is really a hero, a literary hero for our time.
Amazing. That's a great story. Speaking of Columbia, there's a lot of that in here too. I mean, the book takes place a lot in the library, but you also have the characters going downtown and all the way up to, I mean, we're all over the city. At Columbia Journalism School, you see Laura, the main character, really wanting to go, figuring out a way to pay for it. You know, she has 2 kids at home and still she goes, and it's a whole big deal, and works so hard. And I won't give anything away, but there was so much sexism and discrimination really against women and the types of assignments they were giving women versus men. And I wondered how much of that you made up and how much was actually going on at the time.
Much of it is true and taken right from a really interesting and powerful history of the school that talked about how, you know, the class of women in 1912, when it opened, there was only 15% women. It was amazing. It was co-ed, to be honest. So they were lucky to be there. But yeah, so the men would be sent down to cover stories at City Hall or the latest murder, and women would be told to go to the charitable organization and do interviews about orphans with tear-stained cheeks. And so Laura, my character, really, you know, chafes against that and wants to do more. And, you know, I have to say, I went to Columbia and my experience was not like that at all. It was amazing. It taught me so much about writing and thinking and creating a story and what works and what doesn't work. It was the best year of my life. I absolutely loved it and really set me on this career as a fiction writer, believe it or not. And just to prove that point, today the class makeup at the Columbia Journalism School is 75% women.
Huh.
So things have changed.
I know. I know when I was reading it, I was like, does she have some sort of grudge against an old professor?
No,
Is there something going on here or something? I guess not. Okay. Another sign of the times. I think that's one of the things that was so great about this book is so many of the issues and struggles are things that are talked about all the time today. I mean, the balance between being with your kids, working, sharing the mental load, all of this stuff that is going on there, it's still going on. And there are just a few quotes. You wrote, "What if she and Jack had shared the work of domestic life, been truly equals, both inside and outside the home? What if, as a rule, husbands helped out more around the house instead of putting their work ahead of family, the way Jack had done? It wasn't her fault, and maybe it wasn't so terrible that she'd wanted more out of life." So it's like she's still thinking about all this. And in the beginning, there's this heterodoxy club that Laura sort of finds herself ensnared in and realizes there's this myth of the new woman who will, quote, make themselves available to whomever they choose. They will not only demand sexual power, they will seize economic power, which of course was massively threatening to men who viewed it as a finite resource, this economic power. So what should they do about it? So talk to me about interjecting that whole sort of conflict into the story.
Yeah, the Heterodoxy Club was fascinating. It was founded in 1912 by a woman named Marie Jenny Howe, who was a feminist organizer and suffragette. And what she did is she created these meetings every other Saturday that were held above a restaurant on McDougal Street. And women were allowed to come and just discuss the issues of the day. And what struck me were the issues that they were talking about then are the issues that, you know, we consider more about the 1970s. So it was about equal rights, birth control, women's rights, the right to vote, even free love they were discussing about, and just really trying to create a new role for women. And that was, they called themselves the new woman. And yeah, I was just amazed at how, and that's where writing these books is so interesting, because I can really compare how things have changed and how they have not. And so there are so many strings that are still, unwound today of where women don't get paid equally and other issues. And so it was just interesting to see how it carries through the centuries.
I feel like one of the themes underlying this whole book is, does a woman really need a man? And it starts with, Sadie pulling a book about being a spinster. I can't remember what it's called, but something like the guy, the Insider's Guide to the Spinster's Life or something like that. And she uses this as a Bible for a while of why it's okay. Like, you don't have to be with someone. And her past love, that was enough. She was like done with it. And of course, Laura goes through a lot of different iterations and trying to solve that question for herself. And it's like, I don't know, what, do you have a point of view? Like, are you like, do men, are they expendable? What do you think? Right. I know your husband's in the next room, so maybe, I don't know.
No, I like that both characters are really out of step with their time. Laura in the 1910s wants more out of life. She doesn't want to stay home and raise kids. She wants a job. She wants to bring in income. And then Sadie in the 1990s loves wearing vintage clothes. She loves old books. She wants to just step back in time and take her guidance from, a book on the joys of spinsterhood. And so I like the fact that they're both trying to figure out who they are in times that were really volatile.
I feel like you totally captured this sense of like a mom just like can't win, right? Like Laura goes to all this trouble. She goes to Columbia and then she goes down, she tries to pursue like what makes her her, right? Her true passions. And then, one day her son is sick and it could have been something minor. I won't say anything more, but of course it's like, and then she blames herself, like, of course, because she was downtown. I mean, she could have been out for groceries, right? It doesn't matter. Like the guilt and the shame and the level of expectation that like mothers in particular, but women, of course, and I mean, frankly, everybody, but puts on themselves. It was just so perfect in that walk uptown when like she wishes she had known what was going on.
Yeah, and what's so funny? I just finished the book Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. And that is about that, that's what it opens with. And I think it is. I don't have children, but I think it's just such a powerful force in a woman that, to bring it out in a book, I hope deepens the character.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all of it. Even just the thought, frankly, of when she was in a bad mood once, walking uptown and being like, ugh, now I've got to go, cuddle into my like stone castle here in the middle of Manhattan. Like, how bizarre must that have been to be living in an empty, monument essentially in the middle of town. Crazy, yeah. Right? I mean, yeah. I see why you would want to imagine what would have happened in the interior lives there.
And it was so lovely because the library let me get back behind the scenes and I could go and visit the old apartment, which is now storage and offices, and just get a sense of what that was like climbing up those stairs and, what it was like inside. And that was really helpful in helping to bring it to life.
What do you think is going to happen now? I mean, libraries and, all these cultural institutions in the city and everywhere, frankly, but what are we going to do without these as like the hubs and like taking for granted with COVID now going back, I don't know, in the fall? I don't know. What do you think's it's just so sad.
I know. But the city, I mean, I'm amazed at the energy here in the city, and everybody is masked and everybody everyone, is really working hard and working together at the moment. So fingers crossed it stays healthy. But, it's again, looking at the past, you look at the Spanish flu of 1918 to 19 and how that decimated families in the city, and theaters were closed and everything shut down. And then it came back to life. and that's, if anything, New York is resilient. And I think that's why I love focusing on buildings in New York, because they have layers of ghosts and they have so many stories. And, these buildings have had inhabitants who went through the Spanish flu of 1918 or 19. And I love the idea that their ghosts still walk the halls and, that there's stories to be mined in here, and New York will go on. It's resilient and it's a powerful city.
I needed that. Thank you. So where are you going to take us next? What's your next book about? What are you researching?
Yeah, sure. So the next book I'm looking at is set at the Frick collection. And that's a really wonderful, it's a really beautiful gem of a building on Fifth Avenue that was owned by Henry Clay Frick and his family. And it was their residence. And then later it became a museum. And so I love that, again, that dual idea of it's a residence where people live, and then a museum. And we'll see where it goes. Still early stages. And right now, Lions is taking up a lot of my time, but I will get back to it.
What was it like, by the way, being picked for the GMA book club? Was that just so exciting? Like, tell me about that.
Wow, it's really every author's dream. I mean, it's been such a great day, and the the book community is incredible, and so it makes me a little teary. But they were so supportive, and there's so many wonderful friends I have out there, and some friends made this hilarious video about the book launch. And even though we can't see each other, there's just so much support, and social media has really come together to bring us all together. And so I'm just really indebted to my team at Dutton and at Janko Nesbitt and Kathleen Carter, and just so many people. It's a team. It's absolutely a team effort. And I'm lucky to have a great team behind me.
Oh, well, but still, it's a story. And I mean, I don't know. It's just very exciting.
It was great. I have to say, watching them unveil it on TV was, we both yelled.
Good. I'm glad. You deserve it. It's great. It's so exciting. In terms of your actual writing, so how long does each book take, and where's your, I know you did a lot of work on this in the library, but where's your go-to favorite place when you have your druthers, not when we're all in quarantine or whatever?
Yeah, I would say it's in my office. I have an apartment here in the city, and I have a kind of a sideways view of the Hudson, and there's something about watching water flow by that's very helpful, or to watch a tropical storm blow in. That's interesting too. But I have a place, a farmhouse just north of the city. And when we're up there, my boyfriend and I were both writers. And so we each have different ends of the dining room table. And we can kind of ask each other help for, what is that word? And that's wonderful. And that's been really helpful during this time because, you can look out and see trees and grass, and there's a vegetable garden. And so I can watch the squirrels eating the sunflowers. And so that's been a real gift right now to be able to go and write there.
Do you have like a word quota? Like, how do you churn it out? How do you like get up each day and just make sure you're doing it? Like, what's your secret?
My dad is an engineer, and so I approach it kind of scientifically, and I think that helps. I figure out how long it'll take to research, and then how many words I need to write a day in order to complete a first draft in 3 or 4 months. And so I really plan it out. I understand my characters. I understand what they want. I put obstacles in their way. And then I weave these two storylines together. And because there's an element of mystery to all my books, there are days that I just want to, go and eat a lot of cheese because it's way too hard. And just having to drop clues in the right place, and, red herrings in the wrong one. There are days it's crazy. But if I just stick with it and do, say, 1,500 words a day, I will, in the end, have a first draft. And from there, it's a matter of shaping it. And I probably do about 10 drafts until it's ready to be seen. Wow. So it's a long process. It feels like sculpting words, and making the sentences flow and making it work. And then, of course, you have to get it out to your editor or your agent to look at it, because you can't see it, when you're that embedded in the story. And it's so helpful to have a collaborative team. And that's what I learned at journalism school, really, was the importance of a really good editor to say, wait, what about this? You're missing that, because you just can't see it.
Interesting. Wow, exciting. So do you have advice for somebody out there who wants to write a book like yours, or any of that, aspiring authors, wannabe Fionas?
Yeah, I'd say don't rush. I went through a number of careers. I was an actress, and then I worked as a journalist before I found an idea that I had for an article that I just wanted to write. And it wasn't right as an article, it was better as a book. And that became my first book. And it was only once I kind of lived, and gone through a lot. I had one year that I call my year of D's, where I got divorced. My dog, who was a doodle, she died. You
Oh.
know, there was just cascade of loss after cascade of loss. And it was only once everything was really stripped away, to be honest, that I found my footing and found a story that I wanted to tell, and found what I wanted to do with my life. And so that was really wonderful. People ask me all the time, you know, how do you write a book a year? And I'm like, well, I don't have kids, I'm divorced, and I highly recommend it, I'll be honest. It really works. And you know, I joke around that Virginia Woolf sold herself short. She should have held out for a house of one's own, because that's much better than just a room. And so I think that helps in terms of the pace of turning out books fairly quickly. But I just like to do it. And I like to see if I can get to the end and pull off a major plot twist, or you know, a character switch or something like that. And that's very satisfying to me.
Oh, that's great. That's so, you know, it's so inspiring to know that sometimes when everything else is gone, that's when you can like listen to your true self and it comes through, and then it's ready to come out. I feel like my husband always says like, let things unfold organically. And I'm like, whatever, but it's true. You know, that's like what you're saying. It's like things just have to go on their own schedule, and you can't rush being a writer. Sometimes you have to have the life stuff to back it up.
I think so. And you know, I'm a total control freak. And so it's very hard to let things fall as they will. But in the end, I think you're right. And so I think, you know, feeling like if you wanted to write a book and you haven't written it by the time you're 30 or 40 or 50 or 60, that's okay. You know, when you're ready to tell the story, you will. And if you want to write a book, you should. And I had never dreamed that I would write a book, ever. I thought other people did that kind of thing. I loved reading them. So you just don't know until the story really, really captures you.
I think they should start a greeting card line that it's like, welcome to your 40s. Now you can write a book. You can leave the other ones on the shelf. Your published book is coming. Now's the time to tell your story.
Exactly.
Young Lions. It's just like sometimes, and great work obviously can come from people when they're really young, but
Okay.
I've even talked to people who have published really early and then have to live up to that as they get older, right? And that's another kind of pressure. So you know, it's okay for it all to take time, really, right? It's like, I don't know.
Exactly.
Should we take some questions? What do you think? Or should we?
Yeah, well, you know what? I have a couple slides that just are about the history of the library, and I just thought that might be fun.
Yes.
Yeah, if we put up slide number 2, just because I know people are interested in the building. So the library, here's a shot of it from 1908, which is pretty incredible. When it was built, it was finished in 1911. It was the largest marble structure in America at the time, which is incredible. It took 9 years and $9 million to build. When it opened, it had 1 million books inside. There were 50,000 visitors the very first day. And it was, the architects were Curator and Hastings, and they not only designed kind of the architectural structure around it, they also designed the details like the lights or the desks and even the wastebaskets, which is pretty wild.
Wow.
And if we put up shot number 3, this is the reading room that's inside the library on the very top floor. And it's enormous. It's so beautiful. And the ceiling is gorgeous. And a lot of my book takes place in the reading room. There's a lot going on in there. And the way in the past people would order books is they would go to the catalog room, which is just off this room, and you'd fill out a call slip, and then they'd send it via a pneumatic tube down to the stacks. And if we put up number 4, here's a kind of a view of the stacks, and it's right under the reading room, which is at the very top of the illustration there. And there's 7 layers of bookcases and bookshelves. And the pages would get the call slip and run and try and find the book as fast as they can and come back, and it would work on kind of a trolley system, like a Ferris wheel, to bring the books up and down, as well as a dumbwaiter for oversized books. And that's kind of how it worked. And even today, that's still how it works, other than instead of pneumatic tubes, they have computers. But it's just a beautiful, beautiful building. And, sadly, Carrere was in a taxi accident a few months before it opened. So he never got to see this final building, which is so sad. And it's just a kind of a monument to New York and to ingenuity and to beauty, I think.
Absolutely. I feel like that's another book you can write about his life.
Yes. Oh, I know. Architects are great to write about. They're fascinating.
Well, thank you for the history. It's so nice when things when they just can stay the course of time, right? I mean, it doesn't look that different than in 1908. It's crazy. And the people
No.
going in, what they would read, of course, is so different. But anyway.
Of course, the lions now have masks, of course. So
do they really? No.
yeah, they have 4-foot wide masks on them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'll have to get some pictures of that. Okay, well, brace yourself. We have lots of questions here.
Let's do this. Yes, yes.
All right. So, what is your favorite piece of research that did not make it into the book? And what was the most surprising thing you learned about the New York Public Library?
That's a great question. The funniest piece of research that I would have loved to throw in the book, but you can't add everything, was I was going through these old Harper's Bazaar magazines. So they were women's magazines from 1913, 14. And one of them had this whole, it's all articles about women's struggle and voting and, women's rights. But then there was this article about the barrel diet. And what it was you to get a barrel and you take it out either end, and then you festoon it with ribbons, and then you get into it and roll around on your bedroom floor until you're sweaty. And they had an illustration, which was great.
Like, thanks.
Yeah. So the barrel diet did not make it into the book, but was just one of those things that I just loved. And the most surprising thing was really the apartment that a family lived deep within the library. To me, that was the spark that really inspired the entire book.
Do you know what happened to any of the descendants of that family, or were you able to get in touch? Or
I don't, I wasn't able to get in touch. Oh, I'd love to. But I know the son went on to become chief engineer of the library. But they moved out after 30 years. So the residents became part of just the regular part of the library in around 1941. So yeah, and the kids went off. But there's wonderful articles in the New York Times about the family that lived there. And there's also a book by a young adult author, Kristen O'Donnell Tubbs, and it's called The Story Collector, and it's all about the family in the library from the kids' point of view. It's wonderful.
Can you talk about exactly how you do your research, specifically in your historic timelines?
Yeah, so, having gone to journalism school, they send you out the very first day to go interview people, and you are terrified because you're talking to strangers and asking them intrusive questions. But you learn quickly that people love to talk about what they do. And so I found some fascinating people who know the history of New York so well. One of them's name is Andrew Alpern, and he's an architectural historian. And I don't write a book before I go downtown and meet him for lunch. Mm-hmm. And he told me about Jean Ashton, the librarian. He was the one who supplied that information, which became just a really strong part of the book. And he just knows all of New York stories, and he knows the buildings really well. And so, excuse me, for me, it's about getting out there and meeting people and exploring the buildings and getting inside and meeting people who also live inside, if it's the Chelsea Hotel or the Barbizon Hotel for Women. And then I'll try and read books that were written at that time, which can be helpful to get a sense of the voice of the period and what people thought back then. And then, it's things like the New York Times archive, the Times Machine is really helpful to go back and look at what was important at that time. And you can get an overview of, all right, if it's 1912 or 13 or 14, what was going on that month that could maybe inform the story.
Speaking of books written at that time, your character Jack spends most of the book writing a book, which I really wanted you to include a chapter of, because at the end I was like, well, what's that book about? I want to know. There was not enough. In fact, Laura called it Jack's mistress and became very jealous of this book. Did you like have any sort of a vision in your head of what Jack's book was, or was it like a symbol of something else? Or
Yeah, I imagine it's sort of like an F. Scott Fitzgerald, something like that about New York at this vibrant time as, heading into the roaring 20s, and all about the life of the struggling artist, I think, is what his book is about.
well, okay, another book for us all to read that you can write, in case you're looking for ideas. Who is your favorite character to develop and write about, and why? And what's a silver lining you can share with us that's been meaningful to you? Oh, sorry, that's a totally different question.
Okay.
Okay. I'll come back to that. Who is your favorite character to develop and write about, and why?
Oh, these are great questions. I really like Sadie, because she's in 1993, and she's been through a lot, and she's a little prickly. And she really feels like the library is hers. And so the opening scene with her is her being agitated at all the tourists going in and out like widgets. And she thinks it should be closed off except between the hours of 7:30 to 9 for tourists. And, so she can do her work. And she just loves these documents and objects that are in the Berg collection, and her devotion to the history of the written word, to me, just makes her a powerful figure.
And you have her like jetting off to CBGB's at night by herself, like hanging out at the bar, which I thought was so funny. Okay. Like, whatever you want, go for it.
Yeah, it's fun to capture old New York, like CBGB's. There's Book Row, which was just down below Union Square, where all these bookstores used to be, now there's just the Strand. But I love exploring old New York.
What is a silver lining you can share with us that has been meaningful to you as we're all still struggling with COVID?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think for a lot of writers, because what we do is so interior, I work from home, I'm sitting in front of the computer, not talking much. And so that hasn't changed much. And so I'm very lucky that way, and that I don't interact a lot with people in my day-to-day work. But I think maybe the silver lining is people rediscovering passions. And I think we're so busy running around and doing things that small things like needlepoint or puzzles or, playing crazy eights with your kids. And I think because we've all been quarantined, that's given us the chance to drive each other crazy, but also just take in those small moments and remember what it's like when you're, to start painting again, or something that you loved to do when you were a kid. And I hope that, people who are finding solace in that kind of act can stay with it even once things hopefully come back to normal.
Needlepoint, old life. Needlepoint.
You can tell I write in the 1900s, can't you?
Oh my gosh. How do you choose the names of your characters?
Oh, what I do is I go online and I do a search I figure out how old they are, and so what year were they born? And I'll search for what are the popular names from 1880. And you get a great list of names that you would never consider. And I love naming characters. It's so much fun because you can find something that really resonates, suits their personality, but fits the time period. And to make that match is so much fun.
That's the same list I used to name my kids. Best names from 1880. No, I'm kidding. Okay. We talked about that. A lot of these we've had. Someone says, I see that Zibby color codes her books. Fiona, how do you organize your books behind you?
It's just, they just go in wherever. And then if I'm looking for a book, I have to spend a good 20 minutes going, one by one through all the bookshelves. And so it's absolutely not coordinated at all. I think some of the older books are in the hallway in the bookcase there. So I know if it's a book I haven't touched in a while, it's probably there, but that's about it.
Awesome. What are you reading? Are you doing a lot of reading? And if so, what are you reading?
I'm reading a lot, and there's some great stuff out there. It's incredible. There's a book called The Daughters of Foxcote Manor by an English author named Eve Chase that is great. It was just reviewed in the New York Times, I think, last weekend. And that is a great book, crumbling manor house, generations of daughters and mothers, and a mystery. So that's a great one, and some great plot twists. There's a couple books coming out that I'm very excited about. There's The Exiles by Christina Baker Klein, set in Australia, fantastic historical fiction. There's a debut author named Asha Lemmy who has a book coming out called 50 Words for Rain. And it's post-World War II Japan from the point of view of a girl who's half Black and half Japanese. And again, just a beautifully written book. And then I have to give a shout out to there's a book coming that came out the same day as mine did called In Case of Emergency. If you like thrillers, I highly recommend it. It's by E.G. Scott, which is a writing duo. And my boyfriend is one half of that duo. And so I am biased, but it's a really great thriller and I highly recommend it. And happy launch day to him.
Yay. Do you think you might set a book inside a New York City hospital, both in the time of the 1918 flu epidemic and during the current pandemic? Which, by the way, great book idea.
Wow. I think this person should write it. Oh my goodness. That's a great idea. One of my books is set partly at Blackwell's Island in a woman's asylum. That's the address, which is set at the Dakota. And there's part of it takes place in Blackwell's Asylum, which was a women's hospital / asylum in the 1880s. And it's really eye-opening when you dive into the medical practices of the past. And I think that's a great idea for the book. Someone needs to write that.
Okay. It's up for grabs. How do you feel about television or film adaptations of your books? Would you want to be involved in the production?
Oh, I think that would be grand. It's very expensive to do historical fiction on TV. But you see, like with Mrs. Maisel there, it's happening. There's some really wonderful things happening. I think that would be absolutely great. And, I don't know a whole lot about the TV world, so I probably would be reluctant to get involved and, have a strong opinion. But then I do tend to have strong opinions. So, hey, we'll see.
TBD. How did you choose the title of the book?
I am so bad at titles. If I chose a title, no one would buy any of the books because I'm just awful at it. But luckily I'm surrounded, again, it's a team effort. My agent has come up with pretty much every title for the books. And it's not easy because they all have to relate to the building and to the story. And so they have to serve a couple purposes, like the masterpiece is about Grand Central and the art school in Grand Central. The dollhouse is about the Barbizon Hotel for Women, of these models and the pretty girls who used to live there. And this book, it was actually my editor and my agent came up with it at the same time, The Lions of Fifth Avenue. And it was absolutely perfect. And at that point, I actually changed the last name of Laura's family. It was something else before then. And I changed it to Lyons, Lyons, because I loved the way that resonated.
I did catch that. Yeah. If you could choose to live in one of your novels, which one would you choose?
Oh, that's a good question. I love the Dakota. I love that building. So any chance to go live in there would be really fun. So probably the address. That's a great question.
Yeah, good questions, guys. Do you have a favorite time period to learn about or to write about?
I love the 1920s. They're so much fun to write about just because in New York especially was right on the edge of the Great Depression, but there was this wildness to the city and also the costume, the clothes are so beautiful to write about. So probably the 20s is my favorite.
How do you think your background as an actor informs your work as an author?
I think it definitely does. One thing is that I've read a lot of plays. And so you understand dialogue and how much dialogue can do. If you're writing a book, you can spend a lot of time describing a room or something and illuminate a character in that way. But in a play, all you have is the dialogue. And so it's such a lesson in character building. And I also think it helps in terms of moving characters around a page because, in a play, you need to keep actors moving so that the energy in the scene keeps on moving, but it has to feel natural and not artificial. And it's the same with writing with characters. If you have a dinner party, you have to kind of maneuver them around and and make them like I've written dinner parties where it turns out two characters were sitting in the same seat. Can't do that. And you you tend to catch those if you're a little more aware of stage directions.
Good point. Wouldn't have thought of that. Do you have any input into the book covers?
The art department at Dutton are incredible. Christopher Lynn has just knocked it out of the ballpark with every cover. Yeah, this one's just a beauty, isn't it? Yeah. There we go. Yeah. They're so great. And again, it's tricky because you have a book about two different time periods and you have to kind of show the building, what that's about, but what is the personality of the book? So it's not easy. They're doing a lot on that one cover. And yeah, it's just been amazing, to see when they showed me lines of Fifth Avenue, I was like, oh yeah.
It's gorgeous.
I'm done.
Gorgeous. Are there any particular writing classes in New York City that you would recommend if you can't go to graduate school?
Yeah, I did not go to graduate school. I mean, not for fine arts writing. I didn't do an MFA or anything. But yes, the Gotham Writers Workshop is a great place to go and just kind of start on short stories and get your work critiqued. And they even do it online. So I think a lot of it is deciding to write is to kind of get your work out there and start getting other people's opinions on it, and also reading other people's work, because so much of that informs the decisions that you can do as you're writing yourself. And so, yeah, the Gotham Writers Workshop I think is great. And I started there, when I was like, oh, maybe I should write something. How do I do that? That's where I went.
I took a great writing class at the New School by Susan Shapiro, and she's written a bunch of books too. And I ended up just having her on my podcast recently, but she taught a great class on how to write for newspapers and magazines, and said she would take you out for a drink or something if you sold an article during your time, or she gave you money. I don't know, there was something really cool. So I was determined to sell a piece by the end of her class, which I ended up doing, but that's how she remembered me all these years later.
I love that.
Teaching. Her name's Susan Shapiro. She's on Facebook. She's all over. So I love her class, and she's fantastic. Knows what she's talking about.
There's definitely something about going out and finding mentors like that. And another place that I went, I did bread loaf one year. And that's this at Middlebury College up in the mountains of Vermont. And it's just a 2-week kind of writing intensive. And that was really helpful, just kind of boosting my writing to the next level.
Awesome. Let's see. I think we're almost done with these questions here. 1993 must have been such a fun time to dive into. What's your take on the 90s? What was your 1993 like?
It was fun to write that because I was here in New York then. And so, I was living in the East Village, and the city was very different. My apartment cost $500 a month. It was insane and just a little tougher, down in the East Village, and there are areas that weren't safe and you had to be careful. But it was so much fun. And you just had things like interesting music groups or art shows just popping up places. And in a way, going back to COVID, it almost feels like if the rents get lower and, we can attract more musicians and artists and dancers and all the people who've had to leave because you can't afford the rent anymore. And maybe this will be a resurgence for New York in terms of bringing in the artists and the writers and the people who really make a city so vibrant. And so for me, writing about the 90s, that was kind of going back in time to when I was here. And it was a lot of fun.
Maybe for the paperback, you could put a picture of yourself in 1993 as part of
my actor headshot.
Yeah, exactly. Are there any other cities you would consider setting your novels in?
I would love, there's a number of American cities that would be great, but I would also love to try London and maybe do something there because my parents are both English, we have family back there, and that would be really fun to try something in London. And then once things are better, I'd have to go there and fly there and work there. And that's probably tax deductible, right?
Totally. Yeah. All those scones and let's see, I think that might be it. Yeah, I don't know. Unless there's any Oh, wait, hold on. New one. One other new one has popped up. Do you have any input into who reads your books when they become audiobooks? Do you listen and give input, read the reader?
The publishing house takes care of that, which is great. And they always reach out to me to ask about pronunciations or that kind of thing. And it's really kind of fascinating to watch what they do. And they hire the best people, so they don't need my input at all in terms of how to present the book. It's really incredible, and it's an art form of its own to bring a book to life like that. And so I'll definitely listen to it. I can't listen to the whole thing because I'll want to start editing it, just my words. But they do an incredible job. And I love listening to audiobooks and podcasts. And I think so much now is done that way. And it's an art form, and they knock it out of the park. It's great.
Excellent. Well, Fiona, thank you. Thanks for including me in your big night and letting me sort of pick your brain about all this stuff and spending the time with me on such a big moment in your life. So thank you. And thanks for the great book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody at the library for having us, and everyone out there watching us be completely goofballs.
Yes.
We really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for spending your evening with us.
Yes. Thank you, New York Public Library, for everything and all the people watching.